While I'm still
that have a range that small will be restricted to islands, and the reason they're not found anywhere else is because they're surrounded by sea. So this is a species that's in the middle of a continent, and yet it's stuck in this tiny little area, and it's never been seen outside it.
And in the location in this Norfolk-sized area in South Ethiopia, what is the geography, what is the landscape like?
It's exactly the sort, if you pictured a sort of stereotypical African landscape of big acacia trees, open woodland, grassland matrix, that's the sort of environment. It's exactly the sort of landscape that you get across a lot of Africa. And that's really what was part of the mystery. The area where it's found and the areas outside of its range. There's no obvious difference in the habitat. People just couldn't work out why this bird was not found anywhere else. And the weird thing is that if you look at the rest of the bird community that's there, everything else is the same. You've got exactly the same community of birds in the same environment, other starlings and weavers and sparrows and all sorts of things that are in the same environment, and you just go a few kilometres to the west or to the east and everything else stays the same and the bush crow disappears.
That is really weird.
Yeah.
That is really weird.
Really strange.
Yeah. Well, a really interesting puzzle, and you think you might have got to the bottom of it.
Yeah.
So how do you enter this story as a project? What questions do you ask?
There was a paper published in 2012 who produced some climate models. So they'd looked at climate variables across the range and suggested that the bush crow's range seemed to be a bit cooler and a bit drier than the surrounding area.
When you say a bit cooler and a bit drier, are we talking degrees? Or?
Yeah, a few degrees. It's 3 or 4 degrees cooler.
This is exclusively the places that you're seeing the crows. So
yeah.
they seem to be dependent on a slightly cooler temperature than everything else. Well, why would that be?
So we picked a few study sites and went out and watched what the birds were doing and followed them daily, recording the temperature every minute throughout the day. And I had one in sort of a sunny location and one in a shaded location, so I got an idea of what the environment was delivering. And then you watch the birds and you record what it's doing. So it's foraging, it's preening, it's resting, it's flying, it's interacting with its group. Is it in the sun? Is it in the shade? Is it showing any signs of stress? So when birds get hot, they pant. They can't sweat like we can. So they open their beaks and they pant to cool themselves down. And then we did foraging watches, which were really cool. So you stand there with binoculars, get really quite close to a bird, and it's a fortunate trait of bush crows that they're quite confiding. So you get quite close to it with binoculars and record into a dictaphone what they're doing. We then looked at how their behaviour changed at different temperatures. What we found was that when it got hot, they spend more time in the shade. Makes sense. And they spend more time panting, suggesting that they're suffering. And we also found that their rate of food intake decreased. So it dropped off quite sharply as it got warmer. And you might say, well, actually, you'd expect this for any species. You could take any species in the world, and if you heat it up enough, it will start to show signs of heat stress and it will try and move to the shade. To corroborate that against some kind of control, we also did the same tests on 2 species of starling, which are quite similar to the bush crow. They're about the same size, they live in the same locations, they feed on the same sort of things, so they're ecologically similar. The key difference is the fact they've got much wider ranges. And we compared the behaviour of the bush crow to the behaviour of the starlings. And the starlings showed no response to temperature, or if they did, it was at much, much higher temperatures.
So they didn't do all the things that the bush crows were doing, which were to shade, to stop eating so much. So they're more adaptable.
More adaptable, yes. They might pant a little bit, but they're doing it at higher temperatures. One of them showed a reduction in food intake. The other one didn't show any reduction at all, so they really weren't bothered. Their ranges weren't at all predicted by temperature. They were predicted by rainfall patterns. The bush crow shows all of these behavioural responses to temperature, where it starts to suffer, and the starlings don't show that at all.
That is fascinating that birds in the same territory, one could be so much more resilient to changing variables than the other. Now, part of the study, and I think a really important question, is that, well, the Ethiopian bush crow is endangered already. What 10 to 20,000 left?
Yep. But that's probably an overestimate as well.
Right. And with the changing climate, presumably these birds are much less resilient to the fact that temperatures are going to go up all over the place. So does that mean that they are heading for extinction because they lack that resilience?
Quite possibly, yes. As climate change progresses, it is going to get warmer, and the area which is climatically suitable for the bush crow is going to decrease. And actually, even under the best case scenarios, it's pretty much going to disappear. And it's not moving anywhere. There are a lot of studies looking at the advance of climate change in Europe and in North America, which show that climate windows, if you like, are moving northwards. So the climate of Spain is now sort of moving up to southern France, and from southern France to northern France, and birds and other species are following that. But for the bush crow, that's not an option. It's in a bubble which is shrinking. It's in real trouble.
Andrew Bladen on the mystery of the Ethiopian bush crow. That is all for this week. BBC Inside Science at bbc.co.uk if you want to get in touch. See you next week.
BBC Inside Science was presented by Adam Rutherford and produced by Fiona Roberts. In a minute, Melvyn Bragg and his guests will discuss how members of the same species send each other invisible chemical signals to influence the way they behave. First though, let's catch up with Rita Shah. She's in the World Tonight studio and she'll be with us at 10.
Hello, Tom. Tonight, the Pope's opened a summit at the Vatican on child sexual abuse by clergy, with assurances that concrete measures will emerge from the event. But we hear why there are still concerns that any progress may be sabotaged by local clergy. Also, we hear from Venezuela, where Nicolas Maduro is threatening to close the border with Brazil to prevent foreign humanitarian aid from entering the country. And squash has been ruled out of the 2024 Olympics, but breakdancing may be part of the lineup. We compare the sporting appeal of the two. That's all coming up on The World Tonight at 10.
Great, we'll see you then. Thank you, Rita. Now, on Radio 4, here's Melvyn Bragg with In Our Time.
Hello, in 1959, scientists discovered pheromones, the chemical signals that make so many animals act without thinking or needing to think. Ants marching in a line follow pheromones. Queen bees keep their status in the hive with them. They're the instant code word for bees to swarm, to attack or flee, and are the great unconscious signal of sexual attraction across so many species. Insects, fish and mammals use them to advance the cause of their own species. As for humans, that's debatable, as we'll hear. With me to discuss pheromones are Tristram Wyatt, Senior Research Fellow at the Department of Zoology at the University of Oxford, Jane Hurst, William Prescott Professor of Animal Science at the University of Liverpool,
their lungs, so a much better atmosphere at Stamford Bridge than Monday. About quarter of an hour to go, pretty unconvincing from Chelsea, but the 2 goals now, that puts them 4-1 ahead on aggregate and likely through to the last 16.
Cheers, Emma. Meanwhile, Arsenal cruised into the last 16 with a 3-1 aggregate lead over Bate Borisov. Celtic, who were down to 10 men, are out though after a 3-0 aggregate loss to Valencia. Wakefield are beating Catalan Dragons 22-12 in the Super League. That's live on Sports Extra. Meanwhile, Widnes Vikings have postponed Sunday's championship game against the Sheffield Eagles while discussions continue over the club's survival. A prospective takeover of Widnes fell through on Tuesday. And the England and Wales Cricket Board have confirmed that the new 100-ball competition, consisting of 8 city-based teams, will start next summer.
This is BBC Radio 5 Live on digital, BBC Sounds, smart speaker and online.
Quick look at the roads. Slow traffic on the M2 eastbound in Kent. That's because of an earlier accident around junction 2 at Rochester. All lanes have reopened. In the West Midlands, a lane is shut on the M6 northbound. That's because of an accident between junctions 9 and 10 at Wolverhampton. Faye Roscoe, 5 Live Travel.
The Six Nations continues on 5 Live and 5 Live Sports Extra this weekend. On Saturday, on 5 Live Sports Extra, France hosts Scotland from 2:15, and from 4:45, it's Wales v England on 5 Live. And on Sunday, on 5 Live Sports Extra, it's Italy against Ireland from 2:50. The Six Nations on 5 Live and across the BBC.
5 Live Boxing.
And thank you for joining us for the second time this week on 5 Live Boxing with Costello and Bunce. And with so much uncertainty in and around the heavyweight division, Steve, we're turning our attention and diverting our attention to a potentially cracking domestic clash.
Yeah, forget the heavies, Mike. It's all about the O2. It's all about the British super middleweights. James DeGale, Olympic gold 2008, former world champion, and Chris Eubank Jr., well, son of Chris Sr. It's a real domestic fight. I'm delighted it's happening. Too many hoped-for fights vanish. This is here.
One-time sparring partners, now they meet in what DeGale has described as a retirement fight. Certainly the options for the loser will be limited. We've just returned from the press conference in a hotel next door to the O2 Arena in London, where the fight will take place on Saturday night. Eubank is the bookmaker's favourite, surprisingly to some. He's narrowly odds on. And the theme of the debate around the fight since it was announced at the beginning of the year is how much is left of the James DeGale who first won a version of the world super middleweight title almost 4 years ago now. First of all, Steve, your impressions from the press conference?
Well, they were both animated in their own way. Obviously, Eubank slightly less than DeGale. DeGale was extremely animated. They were both incredibly confident, and I think that their reasoning for why they will win was very sound. But I think we almost need a psychologist to tell us about some of their tells, some of their tics, some of their signs. I've never seen anybody at a press conference throw so many punches as James DeGale did. He was throwing punches, he was thinking, he was talking. I was close enough, mate. I know where you were sitting. I sort of snuck in next to the bouncers. He was actually talking. But during as Eubank was talking, DeGale was talking under his breath and throwing shots like he was going through stuff in his mind. It was constant. And then what happened was that became contagious. And there was at one point there when Richard Poxon, the promoter, was talking, where the two of them, DeGale and Eubank, are off in some dreamland throwing punches, going through the fight in the head. I like visualisation, don't get me wrong, but it was getting absurd there today.
And I think James DeGale, in talking about this as a retirement fight, of course has put pressure on himself, but he seems to be revelling in that pressure. As you say, Steve, he was so animated today, and I spoke to him later on for a television interview, and we're going to hear the radio version of an interview I did with him in a gym in northwest London last week, a little later in this particular podcast. But for this television interview, he was virtually throwing punches, like you said, on the stage there, also off stage in one-on-one interviews. He was virtually throwing punches as well, and at one stage he was holding on really tightly to my arm and just impressing on me that what he was saying was the truth, is going to happen on Saturday night. He is as motivated, Steve, as I've ever known him.
So he's motivated by the fear big word at the press conference today, the fear of failure. And there's nothing wrong with that. And I despair when fighters tell me, I'm fearless, I don't fear a thing. Rubbish. I love that idea of fear of failure. I do actually think DeGale's taken it to a new level. I don't think I've ever been around anybody that has talked so openly about this, or so repeatedly and just relentlessly about this being a do-or-die fight. This is the last chance saloon. We've heard that, all of those, that cliche, those two cliches and others get thrown around. But DeGale, I'm absolutely convinced, and Jim McDonald, his trainer, and his parents, and his sister, and everybody in the DeGale business, I'm absolutely convinced, all of them are convinced, that if he were to lose, it is all over. Not because he's got nothing left. This is the key here. Not because he's got nothing left. Not because he's had a hard, long career. 2008 won the gold medal, Commonwealth Games in 2006, all that type of stuff. Not because of that, but because he can't beat Eubank. So that's not him saying, "Oh, I'm aching all over." That's him saying, "If I can't beat this guy, I've got to go." But he's not doing it in a flippant way, Mike. I actually genuinely believe him.
Let's look at it in detail, Steve. First of all, to James DeGale, and I met up with him at his gym in northwest London last week, and he was more than open about this being a retirement fight.
Very open. Very why? Because I've done it with no pressure on me. I know that me at my best and healthy and fit, Eubank ain't on my level, Mike.